While the fire climbed higher, most people stood frozen, watching helplessly. But not Tyler, Marcus, and Jalen. With no gear, no training, and no time to think, they did what most wouldn't dare. They climbed. Because someone was still up there, a paralyzed man gasping for air, waiting to die alone. Hi everyone, welcome to Smart Intelligence. Let's get started. Tyler Reeves never planned on being a hero. He worked night shifts at a local distribution warehouse, the kind of place where the lights buzz overhead and the air smells faintly of cardboard and cold coffee. He was 29, wiry, always in a faded hoodie, and usually had a joke loaded on his tongue. To anyone else, he looked like the guy who played video games too late and overslept his alarm most mornings. But to those who knew him, he was the one who always showed up, especially when it counted. Tyler had grown up in a rough part of Newark, New Jersey. His father had disappeared when he was a kid, and his mom worked double shifts as a nurse to keep them afloat. Maybe that's why Tyler became the one who held his tiny world together. Even when the odds weren't in his favor, even when he was failing math or getting into fights to protect his little brother, he stood up. He never ran. He never folded. And that was something Marcus knew all too well. Marcus Hill had been Tyler's best friend since 4th grade. They were practically opposites. Marcus was calm, methodical, the kind of person who didn't raise his voice unless it mattered. He worked as a mechanic, always smelled like engine oil, and had the hands of someone who fixed more than just cars. He fixed people, too. When Tyler's mom passed away from cancer 3 years ago, it was Marcus who showed up every morning with coffee and silence. Because sometimes that's all you need. Someone who doesn't ask you to talk, just sits beside the wreckage. Then there was Jalen. Jalen Brooks was the heart of their trio. The dreamer, the talker, the guy who saw the best in everyone. He had moved into their neighborhood during high school, and despite being younger, he quickly became the spark that kept their friendship lit. Jalen worked at a local community center, organizing basketball games and tutoring kids who reminded him of himself. Lost, but still hopeful, he had an infectious laugh, the kind that made you forget what was hurting. And he believed in the kind of good you don't often find on the evening news. The three of them were inseparable, not in the flashy, selfie-posting, #brotherhood kind of way. No, their bond ran deeper, built on years of scraped knees, late-night talks, funerals, and birthdays they were the only ones to show up for. They weren't perfect. They argued, they drifted at times, but when the world burned, literally or metaphorically, they came running. That night, they hadn't planned on meeting up. Tyler had just finished a long shift, Marcus was fixing a radiator that wouldn't cooperate, and Jalen was supposed to be heading to dinner with his girlfriend. But fate has a funny way of calling on people when they least expect it. And when they heard the screaming, saw the smoke curling like fingers into the sky, none of them paused. None of them looked around for help. They only looked up, to the 3rd floor where a man clung to life, trapped on a balcony filled with smoke. The man's name was Mr. Henry. He lived alone and used a wheelchair after a stroke had left him partially paralyzed. Tyler had helped carry his groceries once. Jalen had waved to him nearly every day. Marcus had fixed the old man's heater last winter. He wasn't a stranger. He was a neighbor. And more importantly, he was a person who mattered. And in that moment, with the flames licking the windows behind him and smoke darkening the sky, Mr. Henry wasn't just another headline waiting to happen. He was their responsibility. Not because they had to, but because if they didn't, who else would? That was the quiet agreement between them, the one that didn't need words. Just a look, a nod, and then motion. Because when the world gives you a moment that defines everything, you don't wait for permission. You act. The smell hit them first. Acrid, thick, burning synthetic fabric and scorched wood. It curled down the street like a warning, but the boys didn't hesitate. Tyler was the first to break into a sprint, his steel-toed boots thudding against the cracked pavement. Marcus followed, wiping grease from his hands as he ran. Jalen trailed just behind, already dialing 911 with shaking fingers. The apartment building loomed ahead, a tired old structure with peeling paint and rusted balconies. Smoke poured out of the third-floor window like dark water from a broken pipe. People were gathered below, shouting and filming with their phones, but no one dared cross the caution tape. Tyler didn't even glance at them. He saw Mr. Henry on the balcony, hunched in his wheelchair, barely able to lift his hand. The old man's lips moved, but the words were lost in the roar of the fire. His face was streaked with ash. His chest heaved. The stairwell, someone shouted, was blocked. The elevator was down. Firefighters were still en route. Every second was a thief, stealing oxygen and hope. Tyler turned to Marcus. "I'm going up," he said, voice steady. No drama. Just truth. Marcus didn't argue. He never did when it came to Tyler's instincts. They scanned the side of the building, eyes locking onto a gutter pipe running up the brick wall, and an old maintenance ladder barely bolted to the side. It wasn't a plan. It was survival. And it was all they had. Tyler grabbed the pipe and started climbing. Every foot higher felt like stepping into an oven. The heat licked his arms, sweat blinding him. Below, Jalen shouted updates. Fire trucks were 5 minutes out. 5 minutes too long. Marcus found footing on the ladder and followed, one hand gripping, the other carrying an old bedsheet they'd found draped over a fence nearby. From below, it looked reckless. From up close, it was pure willpower. When Tyler reached the balcony, his heart nearly stopped. Mr. Henry wasn't moving. His head was slumped. Smoke swirled like a storm around him. Tyler vaulted over the railing and dropped to his knees. "Mr. Henry, you with me?" he yelled, shaking the man gently. A cough. Faint, but alive. Marcus joined seconds later. "We can't carry him down the way we came," he said. The ladder and pipe were too narrow for a full lift. Jalen shouted from below, "To the next balcony! The next one's clear!" They looked over. Just a few feet away, across open air, another balcony waited. It was part of an empty unit, untouched by the fire. But the gap in between might as well have been a canyon. Tyler didn't think. He just acted. He wrapped the sheet around Mr. Henry, tying it under the old man's arms, fashioning a crude sling. "We swing him over," he told Marcus. "One shot. No room for mistakes." Jalen ran upstairs to the lower floor, climbed to the safe balcony and waited. His arms were ready. His heart was pounding. Tyler gripped the sheet, leaned back, and with Marcus bracing his waist, they heaved Mr. Henry across the gap. The world slowed. For a moment, it felt like the man hovered in air, cradled by nothing but trust. Jalen caught him, not perfectly, not gracefully, but safely. And as Tyler pulled himself over the edge and collapsed in the smoke, the sirens finally arrived. But the real rescue? It had already happened. The moment Mr. Henry landed in Jalen's arms, the weight of everything they had just done hit like a second wave of smoke. Hot, thick, suffocating in its own right. Tyler was still on his knees, coughing violently, the taste of ash coating his throat. Marcus leaned against the charred railing, his arms trembling, not from fear, but from the adrenaline still surging through his veins. Down below, the crowd had grown. Phones were out, faces tilted upward, but no one made a sound. For a few seconds, there was only the shriek of sirens and the crackle of flames. Then came the cheer. Loud, wild, unfiltered. Like the sound of a city exhaling all at once, Jalen shouted, "He's okay!" and raised a hand to signal. That was when the second twist struck. The balcony Tyler and Marcus had just been standing on. Seconds ago, the one that had held both of them and Mr. Henry groaned. Then it buckled. The metal supports gave way with a screech, twisted like paper, and the structure collapsed in a cascade of sparks and shattered railing. Had they waited 5 more seconds, had they paused for breath or doubt, all three would have gone down with it. From his spot across the gap, Jalen froze. "Oh my God," he whispered, his voice shaky. Tyler looked back at the void where the balcony had been. Only smoke now. He didn't speak. Didn't need to. The message was burned into every nerve in his body. They made it out by seconds. When the firefighters finally reached them, axes in hand, their faces betrayed disbelief. 3 civilians. No equipment. 1 paralyzed man saved. No casualties. Just 3 guys in hoodies, covered in soot, blinking against the lights of emergency crews. A paramedic moved to check Tyler's vitals, but he pushed the oxygen mask aside. "Check on Mr. Henry first," he rasped. Mr. Henry was okay. Shaken. Singed. But okay. He'd lived alone for years, drifting into the background like so many elders do. But now, he was the reason 3 young men became symbols of what courage looks like with no uniform, no badge. Just instinct and heart. Later that night, someone uploaded the video. It was grainy, shaky, filmed from a phone, but it showed everything. The fire, the climb, the swing across balconies. It captured the split-second decisions and impossible movements. It showed Tyler reaching the old man, Marcus stabilizing the jump, and Jalen catching the weight of a life. By morning, it had gone viral. News anchors used words like unbelievable, heroic, and miraculous. Online articles called them the Balcony Brothers. Hashtags like real heroes and had modern rescue began trending. People around the world watched the footage, stunned into silence, then flooded comment sections with praise, prayers, and disbelief. But for Tyler, Marcus, and Jalen, none of that mattered. They weren't chasing clout. They didn't go in for recognition. In fact, when local news reporters showed up outside their apartments, they were reluctant to talk. It was Mr. Henry who finally convinced them. "I owe you more than my life," he said softly, sitting in a hospital gown, eyes wet. "I owe you the belief that people still care, that strangers can be family." So they agreed to tell their story, not for the spotlight, but for the message. In an interview aired across the country, Tyler shrugged and said, "We didn't have a plan. We just didn't want to let someone die alone. That's it." Marcus added, "You don't wait for permission to do the right thing. You just move." And Jalen smiled that wide, hopeful smile and finished, "You don't need to be a hero. Just be human." It wasn't a perfect rescue. There was no glory march, no medals, just burnt clothes, sore muscles, and 3 friends who reminded the world what it meant to show up when it matters most. And in a time when the world often feels cold and distant, their act was a fire of a different kind, one that lit up the hearts of millions. Days after the rescue, the city finally quieted, but the echo of what happened didn't fade. Not from the sidewalks where people paused to glance up at the now charred apartment. Not from the local coffee shop where a photo of Tyler, Marcus, and Jalen had been taped near the register with a handwritten sign. These men remind us who we still are, and certainly not from Mr. Henry. He was moved to a rehabilitation facility across town, where the nurses made a habit of sitting with him longer than they were scheduled to. Not because he asked, but because somehow, after everything, the old man glowed. His hands still trembled when he reached for water, but his voice no longer did when he told his story. "They saved me," he'd say. "Not just my life. They saved my faith." Faith was a word Tyler hadn't thought about in a long time. Not in the religious sense, but in people. In what you do when no one's watching. He'd always believed doing the right thing was its own reward. But something changed after that day. Not the act itself, but what followed. A city council member reached out. Then a mayor. Then a senator. Offers came in. Interviews, honors, even job opportunities. A small business owner downtown offered Marcus a full-time job managing his garage. Jalen was approached by a nonprofit that wanted to fund a youth leadership program in his name. Tyler got a call from a fire chief in another district. "We've seen your instincts. You ever think about doing this for real?" He hadn't, but now he did. Still, it wasn't the praise that stuck with them. It was the handwritten letter that arrived a week after the fire. No return address. just a single piece of lined notebook paper inside. The handwriting was uneven, but careful. My son died in a fire last year. No one made it in time. Watching you three gave me peace I didn't know I needed. You didn't save him. But you reminded me that someone would have tried. Thank you for that. Tyler read it 3 times, then folded it up, tucked it into his wallet, and said nothing for hours. Sometimes the biggest reward isn't glory. It's knowing that pain doesn't win. That grief can be softened. That your actions, no matter how reckless they may seem, can ripple into lives you never meet. One evening, they all visited Mr. Henry. His hands were stronger. He'd regained some movement in his left leg. The therapist said he had a long road ahead, but he was stubborn. Just like the guys who pulled me out, he joked. They sat with him on the patio under a soft amber sky. No cameras, no speeches. Just old jazz playing from a speaker and a tray of lemonade. And for a while, no one said anything. Then, Mr. Henry broke the silence. "Why did you do it?" he asked gently. Jalen smiled first. "Because you're our neighbor." Marcus added, "Because you would have done the same for us." But Tyler just looked up at the sky, where the smoke had once been, and said, "Because it mattered." That was it. No medal, no parade. Just 3 ordinary men who on one extraordinary day refused to look away. And in a world that often moves too fast to care, maybe that's exactly what makes their story worth telling. Years from now, people may forget the smoke, the broken balcony, or the exact date it happened. But they won't forget what it meant. 3 ordinary men saw danger and chose courage. In a world that too often rewards hesitation, they answered with instinct, loyalty, and heart. They didn't ask who the man was. They just saw a life worth saving. And maybe that's the quiet legacy of this story, that heroes don't always wear badges. Sometimes they wear hoodies. And when the flames rise, they climb. Not for applause, not for glory, but simply because it's the right thing to do.